So many of you may wonder that as students, you're already quite focused in your studies. Some of you may be, from prestigious educational institutions. And some of you may be very successful entrepreneurs. Your generation is the generation of startups. You ask anybody in our generation, they would ask in the last year of college, what you want to do? बोले कोई नौकरी मिल जाए, भगवान की कृपा है. In your generation, भाई कोई investor मिल जाए. So things have changed in 20 years. But the focus which Bhagavad Gita speaks about is a little different. Because the Gita was spoken by Krishna to whom? Arjuna. And Arjuna is amongst the most focused personalities you can ever find. Because he could take an arrow, place it on the bow, look at the reflection of the eye of a fish in the water below, and then shoot through the eye with that arrow. So what kind of focus he had, you can imagine. He was one of Dronacharya's most favorite disciples in archery. So if Krishna is speaking the Bhagavad Gita to Arjuna, it is not to make Arjuna more focused in archery. It is not to make Arjuna more focused in his skills. But all of us experience fear in our life. How many of you experience fear and anxiety? Okay. Previously in this hall, next to these paintings, there used to be, coaching classes. And 11th and 12th, 10th, 11th, 12th standard students used to come for the coaching classes. And I used to observe that in the month of February and March, just before exam, the number of those students entering the temple would increase. Their prayer was very seasonal. So naturally it indicates this, there is some fear. So many times people, when they go to a hospital, they know why they are going. To overcome disease, cope with the pain of disease. When you see a bank or you see an ATM machine, you know why it exists. You look at a movie theater, you know why it exists. You look at a mall, you know why it exists. Everyone is on the same page on why it exists. But when you look at a temple, each one has a different idea why the temple exists. So the Bhagavad Gita explains in no uncertain terms that in India, if 2 million temples exist today, they exist as hospitals for the mind to help us cope with one pain. The pain of change. So the greatest cause of fear is change. And the Bhagavad Gita helps us refocus our mind and energies in such a way that we are able to focus on something that does not change, so that we remain unaffected by the change. That thing which does not change is known as the soul, spirit, the super soul, and the relationship between the soul and super soul, which is that of bhakti. And so Krishna spoke the Gita to Arjuna to establish the most important principle, that knowledge means understanding spirit, which does not change, understanding matter, which is undergoing constant change, and the controller of both, Ishwar, the Supreme. So that's the whole idea of why the Gita was spoken, to help Arjuna cope with the change which he was experiencing in front of his eyes in the form of Bhishma and Drona. And that change of having to fight his own grandfather and his own teacher paralyzed Arjuna completely. And so, all of us have to cope with changes. But our modern education system is actually preparing us to cope with changes, or to enable changes, or to facilitate changes, to increase our prosperity and minimize our adversity. We are trying to increase our prosperity and minimize our adversity. That we consider as success in life. But the Gita is presenting an alternative principle, that as far as prosperity and adversity is concerned, they will continue. Rather than focusing on increasing prosperity and minimizing adversity, and if in the material world one is able to focus and accomplish that in the material world, that is described as success. But the Gita is offering an alternative paradigm. Don't focus on increasing prosperity and decreasing adversity. Do the needful and perform your duty, and Krishna says, Karmanyavadhikaraste ma phaleshu kadachana. But focus on being a servant and serving the supreme will in all circumstances. This body is subject to constant change. One of our priorities in life is always to maintain this body healthy and disease-free. And any change which happens with respect to the body creates anxiety. A visit to the doctor is always ridden with anxiety. A medical test reports which comes from the doctor, it may indicate some change. And therefore that creates anxiety. Idam shariram parinama peshalam patatyavashyam shata sandhi jarjaram. King Kulashekar describes that this body is subjected to destruction and decay. Parinama peshalam, constant change. Patati avashyam, it will definitely get destroyed. Shata sandhi jarjaram, and it will go through old age and disease. And that's the fact. I was, taking a tour of the campus in MIT in US. And there I found one poster which showed volunteers needed for being part of an experiment on working on a new sleep-inducing drug. They wanted the people who would volunteer to come at 9 p.m., sleep in the lab. They would put machines on them to monitor, and then they have to wake up at 6 in the morning. If they do that 5 days a week, they were willing to give them almost $4,000 to $5,000 just for sleeping. And then I looked at, the person who was taking me around. I said, wow, that's a very exciting offer. But he said, you know what? The problem is not a single person has turned up so far. That's why the poster is still there. I said, really? Why? Because that's the time the party begins. Nobody wants to sleep. And then I came to know that after a few weeks, one student from Mumbai who had gone on an education loan. He saw that. He said, wow, this is an exciting offer. This will really help me like anything. If you want, I can sleep 2-3 hours extra. We have lost control over the body. Night is meant for sleeping. People seem to be needing to be reminded about that. I was in a flight to London, and this is like more than 10 years ago, almost 15-16 years ago. And then there was this other guy who was taking an international flight for the first time, so they started serving liquor. And then he asked the air hostess, how much I have to pay? She said, no, it's free. So he just heard free. And that word does something to people. So he started drinking like he has never seen it before. And then he went out of control in his behavior. So what was happening was, in the morning, I was chanting on my beads before this incident, and there was an old lady sitting behind me. And she was complaining to me, Swamiji, धीरे, जब अपने लिए करो, मेरे लिए नहीं. So I tried to chant as quietly as possible. Then when this guy started shouting and screaming, she again tapped me and said, Swamiji, mantra se usko control karo. I said, Arey Mataji, this mantra is for controlling myself and my own mind and my own senses. And when the mind and senses are not under control, the body goes out of control. I was in a program doing kirtan. There was some gentleman sitting right in front, and he was not clapping only in the kirtan. And I was singing and saying, Ali bajaiye. When you clap the hands, all the sins go away. Sare paap dhul jayenge. But it didn't have any effect on him. He just, continued tapping his fingers. After the lecture, after the prasad, when I went out, I saw he was standing in one corner with tobacco in his hand and clapping loudly. So I said, Arey, I told you to chant during kirtan, tab to tali nahi baji. Tambaku आया तो इतनी जोर से बजी. He said, Prabhu, ये तंबाकू नहीं है. I said, क्या है फिर? बोले संजीवनी बूटी. I said, who told you? When my grandfather was teaching me Ramayana, he used to do this in between. When I asked him, he said, this is the Sanjeevani which Hanumanji brought all the way from Himalaya. और इसको सूंघ कर लक्ष्मण को झटका लगा. So in India, there is a special flavor of additional commentaries on various things. So it's very important to know that this body is subjected to constant change. And this change cannot be reversed or stopped by us at any point. And therefore, the first change which we are always trying to resist is any change with respect to the body. It creates anxiety. We are always looking at prosperity with respect to our body, being healthy, being fit, being fine, being young, being robust, being energetic, and we try to avoid adversity with respect to the body growing old and diseased and losing energy and all of these things. But the art of focus is, in spite of the body either being healthy or sick or diseased, we focus on the soul within the body, that it should remain serving the Supreme Soul, Krishna, in any situation. Because there is a retirement age for sense gratification. but there is no retirement age for service. And so Kaviraj Goswami says, Ami briddha jaratur likhite ka paykor मन किच्छु स्मरणे न होय न देखिए नयने न सुनिए श्रवणे तब लिखी ए बड़ विस्मय. Kaviraj Goswami says, Ami Briddha, I am very old. Jaratur, I am overwhelmed by old age. Likhite, as I am writing, Kapaykar, my hands are trembling. Mana kichu smarane na hoy. My mind is not able to remember anything. Na dekhiye nayane, with my eyes I am not able to see. Na shuniye shravane, I am not able to hear. Tabu likhi, still I am not focused on the pleasure and pain of my body. I am not allowing the changes created by my body to distract me. And therefore, from the perspective of Bhagavad Gita, from the philosophical perspective, from the Vedic perspective, what is the definition of distraction? Distraction means to constantly calculate your prosperity and avoiding of adversity. When you are calculating how to increase my prosperity and avoid adversity, that technically is distraction from the Gita's perspective. From the Gita's perspective, focus is how the soul can be engaged in its original duty of serving the Supreme Lord in all circumstances.